A veteran dies on a Tuesday. By Friday, his widow opens the mailbox expecting the same VA deposit that's arrived every month for the last 11 years. It isn't there. And what she does next can determine whether she loses months of benefits she was entitled to the whole time. By the end of this, you'll know the 3 things that happen to VA-related income after a veteran dies, what has to be filed, and which old rule no longer applies. Stay with me through number 3, because that one used to cost some surviving spouses roughly $925 a month, somewhere around $11,000 a year. On this channel, every week, I go through the real financial information that affects seniors and military families directly. The rules that change, the protections you already qualify for, and the steps that actually make a difference. If that's the kind of information you're after, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because here's the part families are rarely prepared for. The system can stop one payment immediately, but the benefits that may replace it do not simply start on their own. Number 1, the veteran's own VA disability compensation stops the day they die, not when the family notifies the VA, not at the end of the month, the day of death. The monthly check does not transfer to the surviving spouse, even at a reduced amount, whether the veteran was rated at 30% or 100%, that disability compensation ends. If deposits keep arriving after the date of death because the paperwork hasn't caught up, don't treat that money as continuing income. It is an overpayment, and the VA will eventually ask for it back. Report the death promptly so the overpayment stops accumulating and the next benefits can start moving. Another deposit after death is not proof the benefit continued. It didn't. But that does not mean the household is automatically left with nothing. Number 2, dependency and indemnity compensation, known as DIC. DIC can determine whether a household loses that income entirely or replaces part of it with a different benefit. It is not the veteran's disability check transferred into the spouse's name. DIC is a separate benefit, and the surviving spouse has to apply. DIC becomes available when a veteran died from a service-connected condition, or died while on active duty for training, or inactive duty training. It's also available if the veteran was rated totally disabled for a qualifying length of time before death, even when the actual cause of death wasn't service-connected. DIC is tax-free, and unlike the veteran's original disability compensation, it isn't based on income or net worth. As of recent VA rates, the base monthly DIC payment for a surviving spouse sits in the range of roughly $1,650 to $1,700, with the amount increasing if there are dependent children involved. DIC may not replace every dollar the household received before, but a gap is very different from receiving nothing because nobody filed. Consider a veteran rated 100% disabled for a service-connected condition for over a decade before passing away. His widow assumed nothing would replace the monthly deposit, so she filed nothing for almost 4 months. When she finally applied, she qualified because he had been rated totally disabling for the required period before death. The benefit was never the problem. The delay was. She lost several months of payments she could have claimed from an earlier date had she applied sooner. Eligibility can exist, but the check does not move until somebody submits the paperwork. And there is another clock here. DIC claims filed within a year of the veteran's death can, in many cases, be backdated to the month after death. File later, and the effective date can shift to when the VA receives the paperwork. That timing detail can mean recovering months of income or losing it. Don't assume a death certificate started the process. Confirm an actual claim was actually filed. Measure this yourself. You should be able to point to the claim that was actually filed, because eligibility sitting on paper does not create a payment by itself. And DIC isn't the only possibility. If the veteran had a claim or appeal pending when they died, the spouse can file to be substituted into that claim and collect accrued benefits. Retroactive back pay the veteran was owed, but never received. For spouses who don't qualify for DIC because the death wasn't service-connected, the VA survivor's pension is a needs-based benefit for low-income spouses of wartime veterans. Different benefit, different rules, still worth knowing. The expensive mistake in every one of these situations is assuming the next benefit will be handled automatically. It won't. The survivor has to know which path applies and get the paperwork moving. And before we get to number 3, there's something else that can save you hours of digging. So here's what I want you to do. The benefits, the discounts, the assistance programs most seniors and military spouses qualify for but never actually use. I gathered them all in one spot, organized by state and by program, so you don't have to dig through confusing government websites for hours. It's quick, it's straightforward, and any senior can find exactly what fits their situation. No matter what state you're in, there's help out there you're probably leaving on the table. It's called the Senior Exemption Playbook, and it's sitting in the first pinned comment right under this video. Just tap it once and you'll have everything you need. Now stay right here, because the last one is where 2 separate government checks quietly stop overlapping and start canceling each other out. And until a few years ago, that cancellation was costing widows thousands of dollars a year without a single one of them realizing it was happening. Number 3, the Survivor Benefit Plan, known as SBP, and the DIC offset. This applies to a specific group, but for that group, it's the biggest number on this list. If the veteran was military retired and had elected the Survivor Benefit Plan, the spouse becomes eligible for a monthly annuity as well. For decades, that benefit was reduced when the same spouse also qualified for DIC. It was called the SBP-DIC offset, or the widow's tax. If a spouse qualified for both SBP and DIC, federal law required SBP to be reduced dollar for dollar by whatever DIC paid out. Since 1972, that offset averaged out to roughly $925 a month lost per household, or somewhere around $11,000 a year, for as long as the spouse received both benefits. A veteran and spouse could pay into SBP for years. Then DIC would begin, and many surviving spouses would lose most or all of the annuity they expected. That's the old rule. Congress repealed the offset through the National Defense Authorization Act. The repeal was phased in over 3 years, starting in January 2021. In 2021, SBP was reduced by no more than 2/3 of the DIC amount instead of the full amount. In 2022, that reduction dropped to no more than 1/3. As of January 1st, 2023, the offset is gone completely. Eligible surviving spouses now receive the full SBP annuity and the full DIC payment at the same time, with no reduction to either. 1. Side by side, paid in full. During the phase-out years, affected spouses also received the Special Survivor Indemnity Allowance, a separate payment meant to soften the gap. It is no longer paid because it's no longer needed. What people get wrong today is remembering the old rule. They were told DIC would wipe out SBP, so they assumed nothing changed. But that rule no longer applies. If you were affected by the old offset, check your current payment against current law. Don't take an old explanation as proof. Look at the actual payment. Some spouses who were affected under the old rule are still receiving less than they're owed simply because nobody flagged the change to them directly. That is why verification matters. Some spouses of service members who died on active duty, while the offset was still in force, redirected their SBP annuity to an eligible child to avoid losing money to the offset. With the offset gone, Federal law now requires that election to revert automatically to the surviving spouse. If that describes your household, confirm with DFAS directly that the reversion took effect. Check the payment, check the beneficiary. Those are the three big categories, but connected benefits can leave another gap. Health care through the VA generally ends for a surviving spouse who was covered as a dependent. But CHAMPVA, the Civilian Health and Medical Program of the Department of Veterans Affairs, is available for spouses who don't otherwise qualify for TRICARE and covers a meaningful share of medical costs. Burial benefits can include burial in a national cemetery, a government headstone or marker, a burial flag, and in some cases a burial allowance to offset funeral costs. These are separate from the three income categories, but they often surface at exactly the same time, when families are already dealing with paperwork and decisions. Then there is the VA home loan. If the veteran had VA home loan eligibility, that guarantee generally does not simply vanish for the surviving spouse the way disability compensation does. But details depend on how the loan and property were held. So confirm with the VA or mortgage servicer. Here's the common thread. None of this happens automatically just because a death certificate gets filed. DIC, accrued benefits, survivor's pension, and SBP restoration under the repealed offset all require action from the surviving spouse. The VA doesn't cross-reference a death record and start a new benefit on its own. Families assume the system will connect the dots, and months pass. The difficult part is knowing which forms apply. That is the trap. Families assume the system will connect the dots. Then months pass, and those can be the same months tied to income the household could have claimed. There are two more areas to put on your radar before we close. First, remarriage. Remarriage affects these benefits differently. For DIC, remarriage before age 55 generally ends eligibility. Remarriage at age 55 or older typically does not affect it, but don't carry that rule over to every benefit. Survivor's pension and SBP have separate remarriage rules. If remarriage is a possibility, check the specific benefit before assuming it continues or stops. Second, education benefits. The Survivors and Dependents Educational Assistance Program, along with the Fry Scholarship for certain survivors, can provide tuition, housing, and book support for a surviving spouse or dependent child pursuing education or training. These benefits run on their own application track, separate from DIC or SBP eligibility. A spouse can qualify for one without qualifying for the others, or vice versa. So here's the entire method in plain language. First, know that the veteran's disability compensation stops on the day of death. Second, determine whether DIC applies, and remember that filing within a year can, in many cases, protect an earlier effective date. Third, if SBP was elected, make sure the old SBP-DIC offset is not still affecting what the household receives, because as of January 1st, 2023, that offset is gone completely. Then check the connected pieces: survivor's pension, accrued benefits, CHAMPVA, burial benefits, home loan issues, remarriage rules, education benefits. You don't need to memorize every form today. You need to know these doors exist before your family has to open them. This is bigger than a monthly deposit. It's about making sure benefits earned through years of military service don't disappear because a grieving family didn't know which application had to be filed. If there's one thing worth doing today, figure out which of these three categories applies to your household. If compensation is service connected, understand DIC eligibility and what documentation would be needed. If SBP was elected, confirm current payments reflect that the offset no longer exists. If neither applies, look into survivor's pension as a possible safety net. Getting started means knowing these options exist and that someone has to act on them. Before you make any decisions, check this information with verified sources, including the VA directly. And I want to hear something specific from you. Which of these three had nobody ever explained to your household before today? The disability check stopping, DIC requiring its own application, or the old SBP-DIC offset being gone? Put that in the comments. I read every single one. And in the next video, pay attention to the first VA letter or deposit that shows up after a major life change. Because what looks routine on paper can be the exact place a family misses the next step. Subscribe so you don't miss it. And before you leave, write down the 3 words that matter most here. Stop, apply, verify.